Near-death experience. 9 minutes zero line. The white light. May 18th, 2000, an afternoon. A voice said, "Sorry, Ms. Albers, I have to ask you this first. You had 9 minutes of zero on my monitor. Did you see a white light on the other side?" I didn't understand. I was lying on the carpeted floor in my study. 10 eyes looked at me. An emergency doctor was kneeling next to me. 3 paramedics and my then husband were standing around me. A spontaneous idea flashed in my mind to answer the question. I'll never tell you that. Anyone who hasn't experienced it isn't allowed to know the answer. But what had happened? The emergency doctor explained to me. You had a major epileptic seizure, and your heart stopped beating. I had to revive her with the defibrillator. They gave us a real scare. We thought you were going to die, but luckily they're back. A million thoughts ran through my head, so I had done it. Who, how, and from where alerted the emergency doctor? Why is my then husband suddenly there? Many philosophical and theological thoughts moved me. My brain flushed the possibilities through my nerve pathways every thousandth of a second. And then there was his question. How should I answer him? I didn't want to be rude either. After all, he had saved my life. But betrayal was out of the question. So I focused on my answer first. I said, I don't want to tell you. It remains my secret. He stood up somewhat contritely. He would have liked to know a little more about me. I could tell that very clearly. Now just recover, come to your senses in peace, said the emergency doctor. We'll pack everything up then. After checking my overall health, he remarked, we would actually take her to the hospital now. I thought for a moment and replied, no, please don't. I want to stay here. I still had to sign the usual against medical advice form, and after some back and forth, they left. My then husband comforted me and showed me his affection. We had to sort ourselves out somehow. What happened? Nothing other than that when I had an epileptic seizure last year after 5 minutes of zero line, I was there again with the defibrillator at another emergency doctor, and nothing different when I was back again a year ago after only 3 minutes of defibrillation. No, it wasn't like that day. I felt deep inside that this time was different. I just couldn't describe it. What I knew for sure was that it had just worked out like that again. And then there was this incredible feeling of gratitude to God. He'll probably have something planned for me. Otherwise, I wouldn't be there anymore. My brain was constantly rattling. I thought through my entire life so far and fast forward. I even had a clear picture of all my past epileptic seizures. I compared all the philosophical and theological possibilities that I knew and could derive to date with this near-death experience. After just a few days of thinking, I gave up. Whatever, wherever, and however it may have been and would come, I couldn't figure it out. It was so incredibly complicated. I just had to, wait and drink coffee. But that was by no means my strength. I was and am impatient personified. Since that 9-minute zero line on May 18, 2000, I have slipped from one high-profile personal and major health event to the next in every subsequent year. I lost my spit. Everything beautiful and also bad that one could imagine was and is there. And as soon as I had recovered from one thing, I moved on to the next one. All this time I kept thinking, how could this happen again? Why me? What's next? Where do I get the strength from? Who sends me all the ideas for my homepage? Etc. Over the course of many years, I actually received answers to many of these questions. However, I didn't get it in the typical dialogue with other people, but rather I read a lot of books from the psychological, philosophical, and spiritual areas, and drew my conclusions from them. Since my early youth, I was at home in Protestant Christianity. One could say about me, yes, this person is very religious, but for me, believing does not mean simply following all the rules, dogmas, and theses that I knew up to that point. Believing always means asking, checking, and developing further. Since, in view of my many existential experiences, it wasn't about small things, my image of God was turned upside down. Over the course of many reflections, I put my entire faith to the test. The God I believe in and imagine must always be the God who watches over and protects the indigenous inhabitant of the South American rainforest who has never heard of or been influenced by our civilization. Everything that applies to me also applies to this Indian, and that still doesn't get me to Jesus Christ and the New Testament. But not only that, there has to be a God who not only watches over and protects, but it is a God that I can also imagine in animals and plants. I would like to give a succinct example. Exactly one day after my mother died at home, all of her plants on the large windowsill in the living room had died. No one needs to come to me and tell me that plants don't have feelings. If I feel something divine within me, then that applies to everything that is around me. There is something divine in every smallest and largest particle in our cosmos. The greatness of this God within us can be measured by how much we act, at best, guided only by love. God is love. In all religions and philosophical or ethical considerations in the world, there is a more or less identical formula for successful coexistence. It's called the Golden Rule. The children are told, treat every other person as you would like to be treated yourself. In short and rhymed. What you don't want someone to do to you, don't do that to anyone else. As simple as this sentence sounds, it can be difficult to implement in individual cases. So now I felt this God, the divine, within me. And not only that, I felt him everywhere. And it's not just a he, it can also be a she or an it. It doesn't matter. It was crystal clear to me that everyone else besides me could feel that too. God in man, God in animals, God in plants, and quite daringly, God in sand and stone. When a child is born somewhere, it is only up to his socialization and life course how much of this original 100% divinity remains. What should I do to this child so that it develops in the best possible way? This is the question that must be examined and answered again and again, at any time and in any society. The innocent child, and I move on, the innocent chick, the innocent piglet. Of course I write in an idealized way, but I do not care. We have to constantly examine how far we as humans want to go in our omnipotence. How old is the cosmos? How old is our planet alone? And how long have we existed as humanity? In this text, I only speak about my responsibility for myself and those around me. I also answer to the divine part of me for everything I do. It's not just my ego that always takes over. No, there's also God. God and my ego. I could also write good and evil. Ultimately, that would be the solution. Who has the strongest effect on me? I don't have to look for the so-called evil, the ego, outside. I've fed it enough times throughout my life. There were times when it was huge inside me. My aim in the future is not to keep my ego small, or as the Buddhists call it, to renounce all attachments in order to enter nirvana. I am a person with positive and negative traits in and about myself. Like everyone else. It took me a very long time, and a lot of strength and nerve to arrive at the findings described here. For me personally, I realize that not only am I enlightened in this sense, but all other people, animals, and plants are as well. Being enlightened or feeling divine is not something special. It is something we are all born with. The only special thing is to recognize yourself and actually feel this incredible and infinite bliss. And to come back to the white light, I can't remember it now, and I couldn't remember seeing anything at all back then either. What I can do, however, is remember a state of coma in 2009 that allowed me to go through and experience at least 3, I'll write vaguely, past lives, the images of which I can still clearly see in my mind today. End Suzanne Albers, 2019. And one last thing should be mentioned. That would be the question of who called the emergency doctor in the first place. No, that wasn't my husband at the time, but my internist and sports medicine specialist, Haida Haza, with whom I was just talking on the phone, had the attack on the phone, strangled me with the telephone cable. She heard me wheezing and then called the emergency doctor from her practice sent to my apartment. Dear Haida, thank you very much.